Good morning and welcome to the quarterly meeting of the California Board of Psychology. I want to ask all of us to please turn our cell phones and other devices to silent. You may notice board members accessing their laptops during the course of this meeting or other devices. They're using their devices to access board meeting materials that are in electronic format. In keeping with our efforts to move to a paper-light, environmentally friendly process, although we did fall down a little bit on the job here, I think. Nothing light about that paper. We've allocated time on the agenda for public comment, and then we'll ask for public comment for each agenda item. I ask that you be respectful of our time constraints and the need to conduct and complete the board's business. If there are several members of the public seeking to comment on a particular agenda item, I will set a time limit on each speaker to ensure maximum participation by all in the context of a busy agenda. The board welcomes public comments on any item on the agenda, and it is the board's intent to ask for public comments prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. In making public comment, please do not identify any licensee or registrant of the board by name in order to avoid prejudicing future action that may be required of board members in our capacity as a deliberative body in enforcement proceedings. I would like to call the meeting to order and ask that the relevant member of staff please call the roll. Ooh.
Sorry. Bernal?
Here.
Kasuga?
Here.
Cervantes?
Here.
Fu?
Here.
Harbsheets?
Here.
Horn?
Here.
Phillips?
Here.
And the quorum is established.
Let's move over to the agenda items. Item number 1 was the call to order and establishment of a quorum, which we have completed. The second is the president's welcome. Howdy do, everybody. Nice to have you here. So many members of the public. But it's always a pleasure to see people participating in our board meetings, and we really encourage the people to either watch our webcasts or to come out for the meeting. We're also very thankful to the Wright Institute for, again, allowing us use of this wonderful room for purposes of our board meeting here. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk, thank Dr. Newman at some point during the meeting. Okay, item number 3 is for public comment for items not on the agenda. Is there any public comments for items not on the agenda? Okay, that being the case, we'll return to item number 4, and I realize that I've neglected to read our mission statement, our new and improved mission statement. The mission of the Board of Psychology is to protect consumers of psychological services by licensing psychologists, regulating the practice of psychology, and supporting the evolution of the profession. Our vision is a healthy California where our diverse communities enjoy the benefits of the highest standards of psychological services. And our values are transparency, integrity, fairness, responsiveness, and professionalism. And we're going to roll right into the President's report. Item number 4, and if you'll refer to your agenda book in whatever format you have it in, we're going to look at the 2009 meeting calendar and locations. That's the schedule as it currently stands. Are there any amendments to the schedule? Ms. Sorek? Okay, so it looks like it's up to date, and if you have any questions about upcoming meetings, certainly you can direct them to staff or the relevant board members. Item number 4B is the calendar for, or the draft calendar for the upcoming board meetings for 2020, which you'll notice are a little more spaced out than we were able to do for this year. A lot of this planning has to do with board member availability. So we have February 6th to 7th, which is typically a meeting in the Sacramento area. June 4th to 5th, which is typically a meeting in the Los Angeles area or that part of Southern California. September 24th to 25th, which would be our next meeting here in the Bay Area. And November 19th to 20th, which would typically be our meeting in extreme Southern California, as I call it, the San Diego area. But in terms of locations, those are yet to be determined. We do need to get a motion from a board member in order to approve the quarterly board meeting calendar.
I move we approve the quarterly board meeting calendar for 2020.
Thank you. Is there a second? Is there any discussion? Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to make this recommendation that at some point in time we get fixed second week in blip month, second week or third week in blip month for our board meetings, because this totally wreaks havoc. If I'm trying to look a year ahead and think of all the different things, it's very difficult. I don't know if I'm the only one. I wouldn't want to make that change just for me, but I think it'd be a lot easier if we said it's always going to be these dates, these months, and that's when, you know.
I guess the only countervailing consideration in my mind is by doing the doodle calendar, we actually ascertain that people are willing to commit to those dates. I'm just a little concerned we're going to end up with a board meeting without a quorum, because despite the fact it's set for a particular week in a particular month, but it's certainly something we can discuss.
Yeah, I'm just saying for the future. I don't know, for example, a year from now, you know, next November, next September, those are hard dates. I mean, to say, yes, I mean, now that it's in there, I know I have to be available, but I think the same could be true if we had the set dates. Then we always know the board meeting is going to be around these dates, just like any of us now have to look ahead and say, I'm going to mark that off and I know it's not a good date for me. So that's just my recommendation going forward.
I know for myself, if I'm going to do international travel, I will usually figure that out pretty far in advance. So whether we do it the way you're suggesting or whether we do it the way we've been doing it, I think it's nice to know. We can mark those dates off on our calendar now.
Right.
Yeah. Any further discussion? Is there any public comment on the, oh, yes. Ms. Cervantes.
Thank you. I agree. If we could get into a cycle, even if we don't pinpoint the exact week of February or March, if we generally have an early February or an early whatever month, it really does help with the planning. If there is travel plans or different annual cycles that some of us are on, I think it would be helpful. I just wanted to echo that.
Mr. Fu?
Last year I recall, switching topics real quickly. Last year I recall that we had a 3-day session in Los Angeles because of the the volume of petition hearings we've been receiving. I'm curious, before we move forward with adopting this calendar, do we forecast a need to make one of those sessions 3 days?
Well, that's an interesting question, and one that I had asked of staff earlier. Because we've basically caught up with the backlog, if I understand correctly, on petitions, there wasn't a need for a 3-day meeting. And I think all of us appreciate not having a 3-day meeting. So we may have to, at a future point in time, again, have a 3-day meeting, but we've caught up on our backlog. In fact, we have no petition hearings at this particular board meeting. Any other questions or comments? Would you call roll on the motion then, please?
Bernal. Yes. Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harpsheets.
Aye.
Horn.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. And we got a little bit to talk about here in terms of committee updates. The Outreach and Education Committee in particular has had a change in membership. Dr. Tate will be chair of that committee, and Jacqueline Horn, Dr. Horn, has agreed to rejoin that committee. so that it's slightly differently constituted than it has been since the last board meeting. The Enforcement Committee, I've temporarily moved into the chairmanship of the Enforcement Committee. Typically, in the past, the chairmanship of the Enforcement Committee has been a public member, but as Ms. Cervantes has not yet had an opportunity to familiarize herself with our enforcement proceedings to the extent that it will be helpful as a committee member, or committee chair, I am temporarily going to chair that committee, and Ms. Cervantes has joined me on that committee, which should be fun. It's a fun way to start. Those are fun meetings. Are there any other changes I should bring to? Okay. Yeah, and obviously we have the Sunset Review Committee for this coming year. At present, because I'm president of the board, I'm chair, and the vice president of the board is Mr. Fu, is the other member of the board. We keep that a relatively small committee because we have to move relatively quickly. We don't know what the impact, if any, of the Wilk legislation will be, so we will keep an eye on that. But we are coming into a sunset review year, which is going to involve some additional work on the part of the president and vice president, whoever they may be. Okay. Item number 4D is the roles and responsibilities of the board president and vice president. This was based originally on what was in the administrative manual, and we will be revisiting the administrative manual, a redraft of the administrative manual at a later board meeting. But it was to kind of let you know what some of the responsibilities involved with, particularly since there will be on Friday an opportunity for people to declare themselves for either the position of board president or board vice president. Let me just run through a few of those items just to mention. Typically, the president of the board, in addition to running this meeting and any regulatory hearing we might have during the course of a quarterly board meeting, also meets with board management and legal counsel and staff in advance of the board meeting. So I was in Sacramento this past Friday. So there's an additional commitment in terms of time preparing for the meeting. Obviously, there's an appointment process in terms of chairs and members of committees. That's typically not a hugely time-consuming thing once we get past the puzzle of how everybody fits into the picture. They say serve as a designate or alternate designate to state and national associations because we've historically had travel limitations. That has been more difficult, but we're not quite sure how that's going to shake out in the new administration. One of the things I do quite a bit of is reviewing and revising and signing correspondence. You'll note when you go through the legislative materials that typically the advocacy letter might come to me, and I spend quite a bit of time looking that over and talking with staff about it. I'm supposed to approve or disapprove your travel. That would really be out-of-state travel as opposed to the typical travel we do for a board meeting or something like that. From time to time, I receive decisions, orders, or rulings that need to be signed. I emphasize this particular aspect of the job because oftentimes staff needs an immediate turnaround on that. So I'll receive it and have to send it back out the same day. And in some cases, I have to authorize the use of a digital signature in order to expedite the process. This is particularly important in enforcement proceedings because oftentimes in enforcement proceedings, any delay means that either the licensee is delayed about hearing about their decision or a licensee is working with an unfettered license when the board has made a decision to restrict the license. So it's a pretty, you just have to be very time sensitive to that particular item. I do interact with board and bureau services from time to time, most recently as it related to the wage salary study for the executive officer. That means also being present for some telephone conferences where they have all the presidents of the boards have meetings by way of teleconference. And if you're in the Sacramento area, you could attend in person. One of my functions is to lead the performance evaluation. So I take all of your comments and integrate them together and then subsequently travel to Sacramento to meet with Ms. Sorek to go over the performance evaluation for the executive officer. The president also chairs the Sunset Review Committee. Typically, in most years, that's doesn't involve much of any work. In this coming year, it'll involve quite a bit of work. And then I have the particular task, which I groan when I remember I have to do, which is to draft the quarterly column for the journal. Not that I'm not happy with the finished product, but it's just having one more thing to do. Okay. It does. And then I get a reminder. And then I write back groan. Ms. Sork is very good about letting me complain. The vice president obviously steps in for the president if the president is unavailable, serves on the Sunset Review Committee, coordinates and maintains regular communications with the president as to issues relevant to board meetings, board policy, and operational concerns, and aids and advises the president in preparing for the conduct of the quarterly board meeting. That's been a relatively effortless process between Mr. Fu and myself, so I've been very thankful for that. So later on in the agenda, we're going to have an opportunity on Friday, I believe Friday afternoon, for people to declare whether they would like to run for the position of president or vice president, so we can keep these proceedings as transparent as possible and to minimize the amount of off-record discussion. Council will be discussing that more at the time that we go through that declaration process. There certainly don't have to declare right now. You can declare at the next board meeting. I do want to point out to you that my responsibilities with the board has involved, and you guys know about how many hours you put in a month, involves anywhere typically from 30 to 60 hours a month of all my board duties as president and also my responsibilities as a committee member. There was a month this year where I spent 110 hours on board business. That was relatively unusual because we had the ASPPB meeting. I think I also had to travel. I don't know if it was a legislative hearing or if it was a committee hearing or a committee meeting that I also had to travel for. So that would be an exceptionally high amount. I also had a month this year where I had 10 hours, which was really a lovely month. It was like I hit a sweet spot. There were no committee meetings. There wasn't much to do other than check in with Ms. Sork, which I do on a relatively regular basis. But I would say somewhere between 30 and 60 hours a month is the commitment you're making if you do run for board president. I don't know that the amount of time that you have to spend other than as chair of the Policy and Advocacy Committee is quite as time occupying. But Mr. Fu certainly is very dedicated to his position as board vice president. So those are realistically what's involved. And time responsiveness is probably the most important thing for a board president. Otherwise, you really hamstring staff in terms of the things that they're trying to accomplish in the office. If something's delayed on my end, then it's delayed for the entire staff, and they can be stymied by that. Okay, all those things in mind, are there any public comment on any items on the president's report? Any board comment? Seeing none, we're going to move to number 5, the executive officer's report.
Included in your meeting materials is the organizational update. We did hire a limited term enforcement analyst in our enforcement unit, and that is the latest in our hiring update. Any questions? Okay, moving on to Sunset Review, and I'll just kind of go through this memo because it gives a little bit of an overview. On July 22nd, 2019, the board received the Sunset Review Oversight Form. The Sunset Review process allows the legislature to review the laws and regulations pertaining to each board and evaluate the board's programs and policies, determine whether the board operates and enforces its regulatory responsibilities and is carrying out its statutory duties, and examine fiscal management practices and financial relationships with other agencies. Through Sunset Review oversight, boards are also evaluated on key performance measures and targets related to timeliness of action, enforcement, and other necessary efforts to serve the needs of California consumers while promoting regulatory efficiency and effectiveness. So board staff is currently working on the form and will share a draft to the Sunset Review Committee, which is Dr. Phillips and Mr. Fu, on September 16th, 2019. The board will review and consider a draft form at its October 2019 meeting, and then we will be working with the board subsequent to have a final meeting before the form is due on December 1st. As some of you may remember, we had a meeting that was scheduled the day after Thanksgiving last time, which we will not be doing this time. So we will work with you to see when you might be available to do a teleconference meeting. We'll schedule it for 4 hours. Hopefully it doesn't take 4 hours, but this way it will give you an opportunity to have one last view if changes are made at the October meeting of the form before it's submitted to the legislature. So I just wanted to kind of give you an overall overview of the process, what to expect in the coming months.
May I just make a comment, Ms. Sorg? I think sunset review process is a term that we use in a very formal setting, and I think just for, I guess, educational purposes, I think it's important to looking at the timeline that it's called the sunset process because our boards actually disappear and bills need to be reintroduced to reestablish us. And so just for a broader education for those watching, I'm sure, and tentatively on the webinar, that this is a legislative process where the bills get reintroduced and that there is the committee process that we have to go through in order to get reestablished as a board with that in mind. And so I think highlighting that is important given the fact that there is a entire bill process that comes with the sunset review process as well.
And I think the underlying philosophy of that is that they want to make sure that boards and bureaus are doing their work, but they're also making sure that there's still a need for the board or bureau in place. So they do that review on a relatively regular basis every 4 years. And
Sometimes, depending on the board.
yeah,
We're every 4.
we're at 4. That's the max, I think. But it's certainly a very important process for our work as the board to continue to justify our existence and show that we're performing in an efficient manner. So it's a relatively important process. So that telephonic meeting we have will be a relatively important meeting to have all your input on the answers that we give relative to sunset review.
And briefly, just to kind of add on to Mr. Fu's commentary on the process. So the first step will be submitting the form to the legislature. They will then get back to us in 2020 with additional questions, which we will respond to. Sometimes there's additional questions after that for further clarification. And then kind of the last step is the hearing, where we go before the joint committees of the Senate and the Assembly. They will highlight usually 3 to 5 questions that they want us to be prepared to address, and that will typically be myself, the board president and the board vice president during that hearing. And then the outcome of that hearing is a bill which would reestablish us, or if there were any issues that would come before the legislature through a bill process. So just kind of to expand on the process, those are the steps, and we're just at step 1, which is filling out the background form right now.
And I should add that this requires an enormous amount of staff time and management time, and we really appreciate all the time that goes into that effort, even though it's done very quietly. Okay. Is that the... Graduate student reunions going on in the hallway. Did that conclude your report? Is there any board comment on the report? Any public comment? Seeing none, we will move on to the DCA, Department of Consumer Affairs. We try to stay away from acronyms in the context of a meeting to the extent that people aren't familiar with those acronyms. And we have in your hand carry items the executive officer update from the Board and Bureau Services. Unfortunately, Ms. Nelson, who's typically here with us in order to give the report, had several board meetings happening all at once, and she had to make a determination as to which one she attended. On your computer, and they're also in your hand carry. You have a copy of everything on your computer also in front of you. Yes. It's a letter dated August 9 of 2019, addressed to Ms. Sorick on DCA letterhead. Was everybody able to locate the document? Okay. Ms. Sorick, would you like to just briefly summarize for us the executive officer's update?
Sure. So there is a director's quarterly meeting on June 3rd. And that was communicated about the transition from for the search for the new DCA director. Chief Deputy Director Chris Schultz is currently heading the department at the time being. The update on the executive officer's salary study, the department retained a third-party consultant to conduct a salary study of all the programs at the department. On July 8th, the salary study was distributed to board presidents and executive officers. And then on July 31st, Dr. Phillips and myself met with Mr. Castrillo and Ms. Nelson to go over our board's particular part of the study and any kind of follow-up. And we are working with Board and Bureau Services on that. The mandatory sexual harassment prevention training, this was a mandatory compliance year, and our board staff and board are all compliant, so good job to all of you. And the Future Leadership Development Program is accepting applications for a new cohort for this next year. I will again be participating as a volunteer, I believe, in a speaking role. We did, in the last one, I was part of the last two FLD programs, the Future Leadership Development Program. It's where the department looks to support and develop management to be the future leaders of the department and look for bureau chief and executive officer positions and supporting them in kind of a broad introduction to the department and outside the department with our stakeholders at, for example, Department of Finance and the legislature. I was part of the steering committee that developed the program, and then I also spoke about interview preparation and resume building and what to look for in that process, and I've been invited back to do that again this year. So I'm looking forward to that, and it's a great program to be a part of. So that concludes the DC update.
Just by way of comment, there is another training that is due by August 31st. That's the information security training that needs to be completed by that date. So if any of you have not had an opportunity to do that, and I will count myself among those people, the time grows nigh. Really? Yeah, yeah. Okay, we're going to move to item number 7, which is discussion and possible approval of the board meeting minutes for April 24th to 26th of 2019.
I move to adopt the minutes with any potential technical amendments from any board members submitted beforehand or during discussion.
Second the motion.
Is there any board discussion or any information you'd like brought to our attention relative to these minutes? I know at least Ms. Horn, or Dr. Horn, and I gave our technical corrections beforehand, so they've already been incorporated into the minutes. Hearing none, Are there any public comments on the minutes? Again, seeing none, why don't we call the roll on the motion?
Bernal. Aye. Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harpsheets.
Aye.
Horn.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, so we're moving on to the budget report, which will be brought to you by Ms. Burns.
And looking at our budget, in the governor's 2019-2020 budget, the board has a budget of $5,231,000 and an estimated fund balance of $9,843,000, which includes the general fund loan repayment of $3,700,000. If you go through the attachments, sorry, that looked really weird. You can see we still have a 1.1% reserve, so that's what goes back into our special fund. Remember, that's not what you get to spend every year, but that's what's in your fund. And everything looks good in our fund analysis. We have provided you additional years to kind of show how this works, so that even though we're getting our loan repayments back right now and we look like we'll have this very large 20-month reserve, the structural imbalance of our board slowly eats away at these things. So it continues to go back down. So it doesn't just stay where there's this huge pot of money sitting there for a long time. So aside from that, again, historically we used to have more of a gap between our expenditures, what we project, and what we actually spend. We're much more in line now with what we projected to spend, we're spending, and what we projected to bring in, we're bringing in. So that's kind of historically shows where we're at, and we'll continue to give updates, but we're still healthy, and the Department of Consumer Affairs is not concerned. Any questions?
I have a question. We were notified that there was an increase in fees that would be charged to this board, and I'm just wondering if how those numbers might affect what's in the budget.
That's actually kind of a balancing act as it is right now. So the Department of Justice or the Office of Attorney General, their fees have gone up for paralegals and for legal assistance, which we get from them. The hard part is knowing with the other things that are moving in our budget are moved to the Division of Investigation with the Department of Consumer Affairs. Some costs are going up as some are going down. So we're just going to have to wait and see if they all kind of wash out. The board always has the ability to get a current year budget augmentation if we go through all of our Attorney General funds, and that would blow our budget. So if there's ever an Office of Administrative Hearing where it's a banner year and we have a ton of expenditures and that would blow our budget, or the Attorney General's office, same thing, we can go and ask for a current year augmentation, which we did a couple years ago. So as our complaints rise, our Attorney General costs rise, our Office of Administrative Hearings rise. That one year we were looking as though that rise would blow our budget and take away all of our reserve. That year we asked for the augmentation, so that helps even everything out.
Thank you.
Ms. Burns, a quick question about the budget report and the attachment. So you mentioned that overall we're doing great, and that's fantastic. And a quick question about the actuals and projections to your end, which is in some of the line items, our current revised budget that was budgeted was fairly low in comparison to the actuals from previous years. And so it looks like on paper we're going over on that line item, even though historically we know
We've
why
always
we're going to go over. So I'm curious if we know the actuals historically are a certain amount, why it's under budgeted in a given year.
Absolutely. So the Department of Consumer Affairs Budget Office does a lot of bottom line budgeting. So if everything washes out at the end, they don't realign all of your categories. So they have seen them year over year, but they don't align them very much. We're supposed to be going through that alignment this year, but they've been having some fiscal problems and some additional other problems. if you notice, the facilities lines look huge. That's actually because apparently we've all been paying more in rent, and the rent's been higher than what has been budgeted for quite some while, and they just haven't done that adjustment. They are putting through a BCP for facilities to adjust everyone's budgets. So it kind of just DCA's process. And so we'll slowly get aligned, and it'll look a little less red in categories we know we keep spending more in. Because, again, they're only concerned at that bottom number.
Right. Thank
And,
you.
and for purposes of clarity, could you explain what Fiscal is for those that don't know?
Yeah, so Fiscal is almost all of the states' budget operating system. It's a new system also created by the same people that created Breeze. So if that gives you any context. So it is a big system that puts a lot of transactions in, and the department, as well as other departments that are in Fiscal, have had a difficult time getting the kind of budgeting reports we used to get. So our old system, CalSTARS, would give you summary data. Here's your line item, these line items in particular. It would combine them, and now we just get really, 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 really long, all budget items, all line items, and they're having a difficult time categorizing and using that system to get their numbers. So they're still actually closing last year's budget. So things are a little behind in that shop. So they'll continue to work on that.
So if I understand correctly, they give us more data than is helpful.
They can, and then we would never be able to sift through it. So we have our poor budget analyst, thank you, Miss Hinkle, work on putting these categories together for us. So she runs all of these long spreadsheets with all of the inputs and then tries to categorize them in ways that we're used to. That system no longer spits it out in that way anymore. So it's an adjustment in the last year and a half, I want to say it was. So yeah, still working on getting updated reporting on a timely basis.
Are there any more board questions or comments on the budget report? Do we have any public comment? Not hearing or seeing any. We'll move on to item number 9, which is our licensing report.
Good morning, board members. I'm providing you an update with our licensing data. Included in your materials, we have included the license registration data by fiscal year. So just want to bring your attention that we have been observing an increase in the categories for psychologist and psychological assistant, and just a slow trickling decrease for a registered psychologist. And then also in the attachment, you can tell that our workload reports for the 3 types of registration and license that we manage, and also the statistics for examination in the back. And before I'm opening for questions, I want to bring your attention to attachment B, the psychologist application workload report. So you might be wondering why there is a spike in April. That was due to Breeze enhancement. The Breeze system is able to help us in closing some application that's expired, so to help us in make a better accurate count instead of have to doing it manually. And then, but there's also an intended consequence is that there's some the automation closed some of the application unintentionally. So the staff is able to cut them and make the corrections. So we have some manual open of those applications. So you see the spike is due to those 2 factors.
Are there any board questions or comments? Any public comment on the licensing report? Thank you, Ms. Chung. Item number 10 is the Continuing Education and Renewals Report.
It's open. Okay. Hi, good morning. So the Continuing Education and Renewals Report, I wanted to report that the audits for January 2017 through June 2017 were completed, and I'm just going through the remaining audits for that. And then the audits for excuse me, June 2017 through December 2017 were recently sent out, and the deadline for that was August 3rd. And then also the audits for January, February, and March of 2018 were sent out as well. And for January 2019 through July 2019, an average of 842 renewal applications were processed per month, with an average of 657 psychologists renewing as active and 115 renewing as inactive. And each month we have a significant amount of people renewing online, so that's really good. The process is faster if you renew online, just telling the people out there. And so if you look to attachment A, I gave you a hand carry for that. And the reason being was because in June, that line item, it didn't add to 100% in our board meeting materials. So I corrected that and just gave the hand carry for that. Other than that, is there any questions that you guys may have? Hi.
Dr. Horn. No, that's okay.
Could you give us an idea of when we'll be caught up or essentially caught up with the audit process?
Yeah, so we did a little projected audit, getting caught up with that, and barring any organizational changes like with staff, we expect to be caught up in June 2021.
And caught up means
Audits sent out, and we'll be
how far? Yeah.
we'll be we'll always be a month behind. So if we were auditing July 2019, those audits will be sent out September 2019.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So that will be what we would consider
Great.
caught up. Yeah.
Thank you.
I should add, just for purposes of clarification, in terms of institutional knowledge, that the audit backlog existed prior to Ms. McCochran taking over that position. And she's done a yeoman's job or yo woman's job, yo person's job of helping us to start to remedy that problem. And we really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Any other board questions or comments? Any public comment? Okay. Seeing none, that brings us to closed session. Before we go into closed session, I just want to give you a little bit of information. It's now about 10:15. We have quite a few items to go over in closed session. It is possible that we will not finish all those items today, so there may be additional closed session tomorrow. The current plan is to try to bring closed session to a conclusion by 2 p.m. so that we can return to the regular agenda. If there are items left over at that point in time, we will carry them over to the next day, just so we don't totally disrupt the agenda. The board will be breaking for lunch because we have no facility for having lunch right here at some point, probably 12:30. Or maybe at 1 o'clock, and then we just come back for the 2 o'clock. But whatever the case may be, for those of you that are members of the public and for staff members that will have to leave the room, we just want to let you know that we do intend to start up at 2 o'clock. It may not be exactly 2 o'clock, but we'll do our very best to try to do that. So that being said, the board will meet in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126, subsection C, subsection 3, to discuss disciplinary matters, including proposed decisions, stipulations, petitions for reconsideration, and remands. Is there anything else we need to add before we go into closed session, Ms. Marks? Okay, that being the case. Probably not. So I would assume you should take whatever materials you have with you. It's possible that there will be somebody here, but I don't want to promise that to you. Okay. Having resolved that particular concern, is there any other questions or comments before we go? That is as time certain as a board can be about closed session, but we're going to try to adhere to that. 2 o'clock. Okay? Thank you. We'll now go into closed session. Welcome back to afternoon of the first day of the 2-day board meeting of the California Board of Psychology. Just so I don't forget to do so later, I do want to mention to people there are closed session items that we still have to discuss. So we are going to be, it's a blast from the past back there. We are going to be meeting again in the morning. So for those of you that want to attend the public portion of the meeting, we will probably not be going into open session until at least 10 o'clock. So you're safe having an extra half hour to sleep in or drive the long freeway from Sacramento or whatever the heck's going on. Okay? So that being said, the next item on our agenda is, with the return to open session, is the Outreach and Education Committee report, item number 12.
Good afternoon, everyone. So now we will,
Oh, it turned off.
wait,
There you
there
go.
it is, thank you. So first item that we will talk about today is agenda item 12A, review and consideration of revisions to the name and goal of the Outreach and Education Committee. Considering the recent strategic planning process completed by the Board of Psychology, each board committee will be reviewing their committee's goal and recommending any changes to their goal to the full board at its next board meeting. At our May 17th Outreach and Education Committee meeting that we finally had after quite a pause there, the committee reviewed the current goal and recommends the revised committee name and goal shown below be adapted by the board so that both the committee name and goal will more accurately reflect what the committee does. And we were also thrilled to have Doctors Emus and Battle from the Department of Corrections that were there with us that helped us come up with what we're excited to share with you all is our new revised goal. The goal of the Outreach and Communications Committee is to engage, inform, and educate consumers, students, applicants, licensees, and other stakeholders regarding the evolving practice of psychology, the work of the board, and their relevant laws and regulations. And at this point, we'd like to ask that, well, wait a minute. Do we have any public comment, right? Is that first? Oh, can I make the motion for I'd like to ask the board to review and adopt the revised Outreach and Education Committee name and goal into the board's administrative procedure manual.
Who gave me the motion?
Second.
Who was the first? Oh, you were the first motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just do board comment first, I think. I was just, when we were having the preparation meeting for this board meeting, I was talking to staff and management, and it occurred to me that I wonder if we could just call it the Outreach Committee. I wonder if we need to add the communications in there. So it's just a thought I had. Might be nice to get our committee names shorter, particularly for those of us that can never remember them correctly.
Thoughts?
Use the microphone, please.
It makes sense to me because there's so many different ways of outreach, and that would encompass all sorts of things.
Ms. Cervantes?
I would say if we went to a one word, it would be communications and not outreach. Just because there's written, verbal, all kinds of things that encompasses in a broader sense. As someone who's worked in government for a long time, outreach is used a lot, and I have found it to be confusing sometimes to the public about what that purpose is. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to inform, or are you reaching, like to bring in employees, those types of things. So that would be my.
We put a lot of brain power into
Would you suggest going to one word or just keeping them both?
But personally, I like the one word, and I would err on communication over outreach.
I guess the thing I like about the word outreach is that in the context of this board, a lot of our outreach has been to try to better engage stakeholders, licensees, and so on and so forth. So in some ways, it captures kind of some of the spirit of that, whereas communication sounds like a much more neutral function. But it's definitely worth thinking about.
I would agree with you when I was going back and reading the revised goal, and it speaks to a proactive response or a proactive role for this committee versus maybe just communications like, okay, well, we'll let you know when we whatever. But it seems like more outreach feels more appropriate to me.
I mean, I would agree, and I hear your point as well, Ms. Cervantes, but it's true. I mean, we have tried so much to continue to engage and bring in more stakeholders and participation, but again, I put it out to the board. Dr. Horn?
Then I think we ought to keep both names. Outreach and communication. Then I think we ought to keep both names, outreach and communication, because it does represent, I think, different functions and kind of a different activeness too. Outreach implies more active to me than communications does. So I'm going.
I have to confess, I don't feel strongly about it one way or the other, so I'm happy to defer to keeping the committee name.
Are you guys happy with the sequence as well? I mean, I'm okay either way, but like since some people have stronger feelings about communication versus outreach, just putting it out there.
So can you give us an example of what you were thinking?
No, I'm just wondering if everyone's happy with outreach and communication versus communication and outreach.
Oh, I got you, okay.
Since I just mastered the old name recently, I'd like to not put things out of order.
Start with outreach.
We talked about that though, I believe, right? We covered that with CRC and.
We did, and it had a different tone when you were talking corrections and community affairs, and it had a different kind of, I think, a feeling of community affairs. It was a little different than what we were talking about when we're trying to engage and inform people.
Yeah, that sounds more like a public relations function.
Exactly, and it's
Yeah.
not that
Yeah.
that's our public relations arm, so that's where it was kind of
More than
different.
that.
Yeah. Sorry, we made a lot of circles. I threw engagement out there too, and it just was too, yeah, so
Okay.
this is kind of
Is
where
there-
we landed as
Is
well.
there any further board discussion? Well, it is to the committee, I'm sure. Any public comment? Hearing none, could you please call the motion was to adopt Outreach and Communications Committee and to adopt the goal as set
Yes.
out in the memo.
I believe Noreen might have Ms. Marks might have a
Oh.
grammar comment.
For some reason, I couldn't get a sticky on this, but I've highlighted the word "there." And you have it?
So
Oh,
you
yeah, I
have-
do too.
I have "and the work of the board and its relevant laws and regulations" was the amendment we talked about in the.
You also had
And I think we
requested a
took out
comma
a
after
comma.
stakeholders.
Yeah, I think we took out a comma after stakeholders and put in a comma after board.
Did you say included?
I think,
There is no comment.
I think I had that you wanted to add a comma after stakeholders and change there to its.
Right.
That, yeah, it was the other way around.
You don't need one.
Okay.
But it would be better to tend there to the relevant laws and regulations or something like that.
I think Noreen had mentioned its,
It's.
It,
because it's the board's.
and it's relevant, oh, yeah, it's good.
It's relevant laws. Can we read that again? The final one?
Yes, so why don't I go ahead and read it all the way through then for you guys. So the revised committee name would be the Outreach and Communications Committee. The revised goal would be the goal of the Outreach and Communications Committee is to engage, inform, and educate consumers, students, applicants, licensees, and other stakeholders regarding the evolving practice of psychology, the work of the board, and its relevant laws and regulations.
Correct.
Comment after board and not after stakeholders, just like it's.
Yes,
meant
as
to
is
be.
presented on the
The-
memo.
I think the only reason I suggested the comma after stakeholders is because you're educating, informing, et cetera, all of those groups regarding the evolving practice of psychology, not just other stakeholders. So that's why I suggested the comma after stakeholders, so that regarding the evolving practice of psychology applied to all of them. But, what?
So we can call them out.
Okay.
We did.
This is to move to adopt the name and goal with the use of its relevant laws and regulations as the one modification, as motioned by Ms. Bernal and seconded by Dr. Horn. Bernal.
Aye.
Kasuga.
I
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harbsheets.
Aye.
Horn.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Wow.
Just really quickly, Ms. Bernal, I just want to point out to the board, you will have one last bite at the apple on this when the administrative procedure manual comes back to the board with all the committee names and goals. But hopefully it will all be done by then. But if there's any major second thoughts, that's your time.
They may decide we need a comma after stakeholders. Thank you. And now agenda item number 12P. Discussion and possible action on requesting the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Board develop best practices for psychologists when using social media. We had some background on this, Ms. Sorick, but I understand there's been an update.
Yeah, briefly, just before we get into this item, I did get an email, and I'm going to pull up the comment. I received an email from Dr. Messer Engel, who's the registrar in, I didn't copy that, Saskatchewan, thank you. She's my counterpart over in Saskatchewan, and she also chairs the committee that is looking at this issue on behalf of ASPBB. So just to read this off to the board so you know where ASPBB is on this issue. ASPBB has a social media task force, of which I am the chair, and that we are currently working on a white paper document to assist member jurisdictions in addressing the use of social media by members of the profession. The document will consider the literature, the standards and ethics of the profession, concerns noted by the jurisdictions, and will suggest guidelines and regulatory language that jurisdictions may wish to use. We are meeting in September and hope to have a draft to present to the Board of Directors of ASPBB by the October meeting. Depending on whether we meet that timeframe and whether the Board of Directors approves the draft, the hope is that it would be ready for circulation for jurisdictional comment at some point in the late winter 2019 or early spring 2020. So just to give you an update that they are working on this issue and hope to have some materials by winter of 2019 or early spring 2020. So that may guide this discussion moving forward.
Ms. Burns, you wanted to add something?
Did we also want to still show the video of what the Like Nursing had done? And I can go ahead and get that started to set up while you guys talk about the background on this whole issue.
I'm just wondering if the letter at this point is necessary, given the fact that it's already in process. I don't think it is.
I don't think so, yeah.
I guess I would ask, is there something critical that we see as emerging that is an issue here that they might not be aware of? I mean, we're in California where the use of social media. The companies are headquartered that's probably more prolifically used here. Is that if there is, then we should take the opportunity to have a discussion narrowly around that. But if it's just a more general, then maybe it's not needed.
I think from a staff perspective, I think the staff recommendation would be that let's take a look at the white paper and the draft guidelines, and then you guys can continue to have the discussion and then determine whether any kind of further action or determination will be made after that. Do we still want or feel value in a video versus a document? That would be up to you guys, but I would recommend looking at the white paper and the draft guidelines before talking about that.
So I would imagine we'll have an opportunity to put our California spin on all of this once having received the draft document.
And we'll see a little video on what the nursing board has done, and we're going to see Dr. Phillips' friend, Kelly. Was that your girl? On the video. I was being funny. Remember, you saw her. Where's Kelly? Oh, I thought, never mind. Here we go.
Oh, is it over there?
And just really quickly while this is loading, this is from the National Association of Boards of Registered Nursing, who would be kind of ASPBB's counterpart for nursing, that put this together.
Emily was a nursing student in a pediatrics rotation. She cared for Tommy, a 5-year-old patient who was... Emily was a nursing student in a pediatrics rotation.
Can it be angled just a little bit? Can it be angled just a little bit? Yeah.
Emily was a nursing student in a pediatrics rotation. She cared for Tommy, a 5-year-old patient who was recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Tommy was going home soon, so she took a cell phone picture of him to remember him by. That evening, she posted his picture. Him to remember. Emily was a nursing student in a pediatrics rotation. She cared for Tommy, a 5-year-old patient who was recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Tommy was going home soon, so she took a cell phone picture of him to remember him by. That evening, she posted his picture on her Facebook page. Come picture of him to remember him by. That evening, she posted his picture on her Facebook page. Emily was a nursing student in a pediatrics. Emily was a nursing student in a pediatrics rotation. She cared for Tommy, a 5-year-old patient who was recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Tommy was going home soon, so she took a cell phone picture of him to remember him by. That evening, she posted his picture on her Facebook page, commenting how brave he was when he got his insulin injections. 2 days later, Emily was called into her dean's office. A nurse from the hospital had seen the photo and caption and reported them to hospital officials. Emily was informed that her actions were a breach of her patient's confidentiality and a violation of federal privacy laws. Even though Emily had an excellent record as a student nurse and had only the best intentions in her post, she was expelled from her nursing program, and the program was barred from using the pediatrics unit for their students. Hi, I'm Kelly, a staff nurse here at the hospital. If you use social media properly, what happened to Emily will never happen to you. Nurses are increasingly utilizing social media not only for personal use, but also as a way to foster professional connections and timely communications with patients and their families. But social media used inappropriately can result in disclosing too much patient information and violating the rights to privacy and confidentiality of information. This is what happened to Emily. Healthcare organizations typically have clear policies governing employee use of electronic and social media in the workplace. It is outside the workplace, however, where policies are often less clear and the potential for inappropriate use of social media is greatly increased. Effective nurse-patient relationships are built on trust. A cornerstone of that trust is patient privacy, which is a key part of a patient's expectation of being treated with dignity and respect. Any patient information that a nurse has access to during the course of treatment must be safeguarded. With very limited exceptions, such information may only be disclosed to other members of the healthcare team for the purpose of providing care for the patient. Improper use of social media by nurses may violate state and federal laws, including the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, which was enacted to further protect patient privacy. Additionally, inappropriate uses of electronic and social media may be reported to your Board of Nursing, resulting in possible disciplinary action for unprofessional or unethical conduct, breach of confidentiality, or other infractions. While it's true that some intentional or malicious misuses of social media do occur, the majority of inappropriate disclosures or postings are unintentional. Usually, they're the result of the mistaken belief that the communication or posting is private and accessible only by the intended recipient, that content deleted from the site is no longer accessible, or that it is acceptable to discuss or refer to a patient in a posting if they're not identified by name. By being cautious and alert to potential or improper uses of social media, you can avoid inadvertently disclosing confidential information concerning your patients. Remember, you have an ethical and legal obligation to maintain patient privacy at all times. This means that you should never take photos or videos of patients using your cell phones or other personal devices. Be sure to follow employer policies for taking photos or videos of patients for treatments or other permissible purposes by using employer-provided devices. Even experienced nurses should be vigilant about avoiding serious violations of patient confidentiality, as Jason learned. Jason has been a nurse for 12 years and is working in hospice care. One of his current patients, Maria, maintains a hospital-sponsored online page to keep her family and friends updated on her battle with cancer. One day, she posted something about her depression and the difficulty of finding effective treatments for her physical pain. Jason saw the post and responded by writing a comment to Maria. He wrote that he understood her last few days had been difficult, and he was hopeful that the new medication, along with the increased dose of morphine, would provide some needed relief. The next day, Jason ran into a friend who said she saw his post. She said Maria was an old family friend, was sad to hear of her condition, and asked Jason how long he thought Maria had left. Now fully realizing the implications of what he had done, he immediately went home and tried to remove his post, but was unable to do so. Besides, even if he had been successful in removing it, it may have already been copied by others and posted elsewhere. At his next visit with Maria, Jason told her what had happened and apologized. Jason then self-reported his breach of patient confidentiality to his Board of Nursing and is awaiting the board's decision concerning any disciplinary action. Jason learned the importance of carefully considering the full implications of posting any information about patients on any website, including hospital-sponsored sites. It may at times be appropriate for nurses to express empathy and support for patients on a website, but they must be careful not to disclose private patient information. Inappropriate use of social media can derail someone's dream to be a nurse, as it did for Emily. But even for experienced nurses like Jason, who have exceptional work histories, inappropriate use of social media can and does happen. Remember, increased access to communication through social media does not change a healthcare professional's responsibility to protect patient information. In fact, it actually makes it easier to inappropriately share information. By carefully following standardized guidelines, healthcare professionals can responsibly use social media to improve the coordination of patient care. For more information, please visit the website of the National Council of State Boards of Nursing.
Thank you, Caesar, for your insistence on that. Thank you.
Can I say something about this?
Of course,
Um,
Dr. Horn.
A few years ago, ASPPB had one of their membership meetings. The whole theme was social media. And they showed a YouTube video that somebody took. It was a psychology intern who was drunk and was fighting with somebody else about getting a taxi. And it wasn't even professional. It wasn't posted, on any professional website, but somebody took that picture and posted it, and she got kicked out of her internship, and, for basically behavior that was unbecoming to the profession of psychology and like this. So even on her own time. So, it's really quite an issue, I think.
Right.
That's just one example.
I think we have broader issues than what's being presented here in the nursing
Much,
boards.
yeah.
Particularly in terms of self-revelation of information, impact on patients.
Yeah.
I recommend my graduate schools don't go to Cabo on spring break, because all that stuff is going to come back to haunt people, and people aren't really aware of what the implications of it are.
Well, I remember when I came on board, that was the first thing Dr. Horn brought to my attention as well. And yeah, and here we are with where we are. And that said, staff had recommended, prior to Ms. Sark getting this email, that we send out a letter, correct, in terms of something to think about. And I understand that here are some topic areas that we might recommend on. Dr. Horn, you're on a task force, is that correct?
I am, yeah.
So maybe is it that we want to recommend that these are some of the topics that we suggest you take back?
I'm happy to
thought?
do that, but I'm happy to do that, but also I think we can do what Dr. Phillips said, which is wait till they're written,
Okay.
and then we can make comments. They're going to send them out to all the boards and ask for comments. So, we can do it either way. I'll bring it to them, but
I just
yeah.
bring it to the board, whatever the board decides. Right, yeah, no, they're working on it, so. Dr. Phillips, thoughts, feedback?
Yeah, I think we should wait and give them the benefit of their opportunity to draft the guidelines and then see if there's anything additional that we want to give as feedback to the board. And we don't want to put Dr. Horn in an awkward
Thank you.
position
Right.
relative to her role as
Thank
a
you.
board member. So
I didn't mean to do
probably
that,
be
Dr.
more
Horn, but
appropriately,
thank
more
you.
appropriately come from another member of the board.
Okay, so we're good to go. On to agenda item 12C. Oh, did we have any public comment on what we just discussed? No? Dr. Schaefer?
Hi, Dr. Schaefer, Division 2 and KPIC. I'm wondering if there's any way, if you're going to develop anything for social media, to include some structured information around use of texting and emails regarding patient communication, so it's a composite and not kind of segregated out. That's all.
Thank you. So noted. On to agenda item 12C, a strategic plan action update. Ms. Sorek?
Thank you, Ms. Bernal. The board convened for strategic planning on December 3rd and 4th, 2018. And as we have historically done, the staff came up with an action plan to meet the goals and objectives that were laid out by the board members. So included in your packet is the action plan with timelines to meet the goals and objectives, and changes that have been made since the Outreach and Communications Committee met have been identified in red font, so you can see if a status has been changed from the original identified completion date. So I'm happy to answer any questions the board members may have.
Ms. Zerk, I have a quick question. On page 13, under 2.3, start date Q2 2019, are we going to change, since we've agreed to change our name, Outreach and Education, are we going to change that?
I'm sorry, you are on
Page 13.
What page is
Oh.
it on in our combined?
Oh, I'm sorry, I have the, I have my
You have it
document
separated?
separated.
but it's item 2.3, you said?
2.3, yes.
Yeah.
Under,
In the combined package.
72.
Page 72 in the combined package.
I can go ahead and, there might be other committee name changes here as well, so I'll just make a note to make global changes to the committee names as they've been ratified by the board.
thank
And then
you.
each time they'll be brought back to the board, like changes will be made accordingly.
Which is not really changes the original strategic plan as created at the meeting in Napa, correct?
Correct, although there might be, I mean, not having it memorized, there might be a couple, I think that was mostly action plan items to meet goals and objectives.
Which
Because
were created by staff.
right. So I think you're right. I don't think the actual goals and objectives need to be changed, just the action items.
Thank you.
Any public comment? None. And we do not, there's no board action that we need to take. Is that correct? None, informational only. Now, agenda item 12D, review and potential action on user friendliness website focus group notes. These are recommendations to the board. Ms. Burns?
So the Outreach and Education Now, Outreach and Communications Committee, we worked with the committee, and the chair, Ms. Bernal, was gracious to come to one of the focus groups. We held 2 focus groups, one in Northern California, one in Southern California, to go over the user friendliness of our website, and we invited a wide variety of stakeholders. They were both productive meetings. We learned quite a bit, and then also quite a bit of maybe background about how the website makes them feel and ways to improve, which are all documented in the report. It kind of led us to, there's kind of a multi-tiered response. There's some things that were easy changes that were quick. There was others that we need to create content for, such as creating a supervisors page for supervisors of trainees. It would be great if all the supervisor information was in one spot instead of sprinkled all over. So there's a variety of different avenues that we're taking right now. Some will be implemented immediately. Some will be in the content development phase this fall and next year. And then staff will be also working with the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Information Services to implement some of the more technical ones, and then also to check on the availability, essentially, because we use a SharePoint site, so some of the more fancy interactive type things may not be possible with our website, but we do have all the recommendations we'll be working to implement as part of a broader 2020 restructuring of the board's website. Once we do have that content revision and look and feel down, of course, then we can also begin with the mobile friendly site as well. So that was this is kind of a tiered process of making our site more user friendly, to look at all of our content, get that all penned down before going to mobile friendly, which was at the recommendation of the Office of Information Services. So. And these are all just for your review, so no action requested. We'll just continue to work on tacking away at these.
Thank you. Any questions? Ms. Cervantes?
I reviewed the report on our social media update, and I wonder if in the discussion to update the website, there's also some conversation about updating a social media strategy so that it's coming together. Having the content on a website and not having a strategy to disseminate it, it makes it really hard. We want to create content people find useful. So that's maybe I just didn't see it, but I wonder if that's a topic.
It's not yet, and it'd be a wonderful thing to broach once we have additional resources to tackle more things. But we definitely are kind of a one step at a time, it seems, with outreach due to limited resources, essentially. So, but that would be a good topic to come up next. So as we're implementing this, make the next one to look at our social media strategy.
We will add that to Dr. Tate's first
There you go.
thing to tackle. Put it on our list.
You're welcome, Dr. Tate.
And I just want to be clear, the reason why I'm asking is because resources are scarce. And so if we create content, we're spending resources to create that content. And I'm suggesting just that we look at all of the avenues available to us, particularly social media, so that it's viewed. So,
Oh, and I
just
do
wanna-
appreciate the suggestion. It's just, I think even in getting this one moving along with all of the other things, it's just been hard to mostly put the resources in that direction over other things. So,
I
but
believe
it's
we've been
definitely
working on
something we can look at. Yeah, well, and we
I think
started
we've
this
been-
a while ago.
This was like a year ago, right?
Two
Two
But
years
that's
ago.
because we had to wait for another stakeholder meeting because
Right.
we use the Department of Consumer Affairs Solid Unit to do a lot of our stakeholder engagement. They facilitate and they make the meeting go really great. But there was other important work for them to do for us before that, so this became second. So
But thank you. We will definitely include that. Public comment? None. And here's our social media update. Agenda item 12E. This is just current information on the hits that we're getting on our website, Twitter, Facebook. This item is for informational purposes only. No action is required. Does anyone have any questions?
Just to piggyback on my earlier comment, this report would be really helpful if we tied it to those strategic goals so that social media is a tool for advancing our goals rather than just reporting back on these numbers, because it's hard to make sense of those for folks who don't use the platforms.
Thank you. Yeah, I know you are. Any additional information, Ms. Burns?
nope.
Nope, okay. Thank you. Public comment? None. Here is our website update, agenda item 12F. It's below and on the following pages. Please find the top 5 web pages viewed between April 8th, 2019 and July 21st, 2019. Again, this is informational purposes only.
And then, of course, we chose these pages a year ago, a little more over a year ago, which pages we thought would be important to follow and what the board wanted to see information on, but we can always change what pages we're tracking, of course, for you, and can try to figure out a way to tie them to the strat plan if we can, or if not, emerging issues that are coming up, so.
Any questions, public comment? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 12G, an update on our newsletter. Attached is the board's summer journal. The fall journal will go out in September 2019. Do we have, it's completed, correct, for September?
Right now, the fall journal is with the publications unit, so
Okay.
they're putting it together, and then I'll have a draft sent to me for final review,
Right,
probably within the next couple weeks, I would assume.
okay, thank you. Questions, public comment? None. This is again informational purposes only. No action is required. And I am excited about agenda item 12H to report that it has been completed. I also got my copy in the mail. The brochure looks fabulous for those of you that I'm sure many of you have received it. And if you have not, attached to this document here, you can find a copy. Ms. Sorick, any other? Oh, and we have copies outside as well for public members that may want to see it. Anything else?
No, just that we also are working with the department on getting this translated into Spanish, and the various boards that were involved in this will be sharing the cost of that translation, and they hope to have that completed, I think, within the next month. And we've already received requests to have it in both English and Spanish. I believe Ms. Brown said we received over 300 requests for brochures already.
Oh,
so we've
excellent.
already added a request for additional copies be printed so that we can send those out.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And then I would just go ahead and mention it since some of the requests are asking about it. For languages other than English and Spanish, the ADA compliant version of the document on DCA's website also has the Google Translate option, so that can translate into many more languages. Obviously not a certified translation, but for the purposes of getting information out there and into those communities, any licensee that would like to print it in those languages can download and print the text version that way. So that does make additional avenue for those that would like to have it in I think it's like over 30 or 40 languages on there. So
Thank
just
you.
wanted to mention that on the webcast so that everyone can go to the website and find that.
I also wanted to mention that I sent the link that the board sent out. I sent it to about 30 or 40 of my colleagues and got universally positive responses back about how much better the brochure is and how much more understandable it is and up to date and so on and so forth. So I think staff and management in particular should be very gratified by
Ms.
the
Sorick,
fruits
for
of their
being
work.
our champion, carrying that through. I know there was a lot of back and forth and working with multiple boards, and so thank you so much for seeing this to completion. Any public comment? Additional board comments? No? Well, that concludes my update.
And I would just like to thank Ms. Bernal for her wonderful chairmanship or chairpersonship of the, whatever the committee was called before. I'm all confused now. Outreach and something.
I look forward to continue working together with Dr. Horn and Dr. Tate as chair.
I should also just mention parenthetically, for those of you that are wondering about Dr. Tate, she was not able to be with us today despite her best efforts to do so, and sends her greetings to everyone concerned. And I have the feeling that she's watching us on the webcast as we speak. So shout out to Dr. Tate and many thanks to Ms. Bernal. Okay. Item number 13 is the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee report. That'll be another year for me to master that name. Okay, so Mr. Fu.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. So we're going to take up item 13A, which is a review of our board-sponsored legislation for this legislative session. And we will provide an update for each one. So the first item is Senate Bill 275 by Senator Pan, and this bill would add sexual behavior with a client or former client to the violations that would require an administrative law judge's proposed decision to include an order of revocation. And this was driven by the work of our board staff who had noticed several grooming behaviors that led to the legislation being introduced. And the bill was heard, and staff will be working on technical amendments with the committee, and there's no action for this bill at this time. And thank you, Dr. Phillips, for testifying at the hearing. Senate, pardon?
Oh, I didn't know.
So any questions on board discussion on this bill? Any public comment on this bill? Additional board? All right, seeing none, moving on. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Fu, so just to say that this has now become a 2-year bill, will be seen in committee again in January. And we are expecting with the technical amendments that it will continue to move forward through the legislature.
And you will be seeing the technical amendments at the October board meeting. So we are working with the committee right now, so.
Thank you, Ms. Burns. The second item, Senate Bill 786. This is the Senate Committees on Business and Professions Omnibus Bill that contains technical, non-substantive changes to the BMP code. The board had originally proposed to include 3 items in this omnibus bill. The first was the removal of outdated examination language. The second was clarification about our temporary practice provision. And the third was in relation to the voluntary surrender of license outside of the formal discipline process. The committee feedback we received in April was that with regard to the temporary practice provisions and the voluntary surrender of license, that those would be considered substantive and would not be included in the omnibus bill. So what ended up being in the omnibus bill was the language of removing the outdated examination requirements and making the provisions consolidated. And to be clear, when we say that we're removing outdated examination language, it is not in any way in reference to the EPPP2 or the work that Dr. Kusuga has done in chairing the task force related to that. It is a simple conformity to other items for that, and it is non-substantive and doesn't change the existing examination process in our state. And so because the committee did include one of our items and has been introduced at our Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee meeting, we did recommend that the board take a support position on 786, Senate Bill 786, and would ask for our board members a motion to adopt to support Senate Bill 786.
Really quick, Mr. Fu, I just want to add that the language that is included in the bill is the language that was approved by the board. So this is just kind of formalizing the board support of the bill now that we have our language placed in the actual bill.
My question is, on the other 2 items that are considered substantive changes, what happens to those at this point?
So staff will work with committee authors, with legislative authors at the start of the legislative session next year to find an author for those bills. Because of the timing of when we received the feedback, it was past the bill introduction deadline. So bills typically have to be introduced by the end of January, and I think it was the first week of February in this case, in the first year of a legislative session. So we will look for, I'm assuming we'll be looking for an author at the beginning of next year or at the end of this year with those 2 items, if it is the will of the board and staff's recommendation as well.
Exactly, and we can look into that as well as there's potentially opportunities within the sunset review process for things that are not simply technical omnibus language that are like omnibus bills need to be non-substantive, very technical. And since this is more substantive, it can potentially, like temporary practice provisions clarifying what the 30 days means, could also be part of the sunset review. So it'll really kind of just depend on how the sunset review goes and the committee's response. But barring that vehicle, we would be seeking a separate author.
Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Burns.
And just to add for a little extra clarification as well to that, an example of something that was substantive that was covered in our last sunset was the approved schools issue, which would not have been accepted in an omnibus bill, but we were able to incorporate regional accreditation recognition in our sunset. So it's an option to consider.
And I just have a really quick question though. So does staff recommend which authors for, to consider, or do you have different conversations with staff? Just out of curiosity.
We, what we typically do is we work with the Business and Professions Committee. Sometimes the consultant staff has suggestions for us to work with particular members. Sometimes we've had historical working relationships with, for example, Assemblymember Levine has authored 2 of our bills. It just depends on the issue, who's sitting on
Exactly.
the committee at the time.
And also, if it's an issue they care about personally, we can, if it's something they care about in particular, we can approach them. So it's kind of a multi-pronged strategy, but usually starts with coming to the committee first and saying, who do you think might want to author it? Would the committee want to author? Or would the chair of the committee want to author? So,
I would be remiss to say I think we with regard to legislation, seeking legislation, we do try to play within the deadlines and not try to pull, a gut and amend in the middle of a session or at this time of the year, just because a lot of the issues that we are working through, I think we just in principle believe that it should go through the regular process and have the full hearing outside of the time pressures at the end of session. And so I would say that's the reasons why we're not trying to do get these two other items in before the end of the first year.
and there's no time sensitivity on both of those. So seeking a gut and amend mid-process, if there was an urgency, then maybe you might consider it. But
Is there any additional board discussion on Senate Bill 786? Any public comment related to this item? And do we have a motion on this item? Sorry, let me ask then the question. Is there a motion for the board to support Senate Bill 786?
I so move.
Second.
So it's been moved by Dr. Harpsheet, seconded by Dr. Horn, and we've asked for board and public comment, and seeing and hearing none. Ms. Burns, could you please call the roll?
Bernal. Aye. Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harbsheets.
Aye.
Horn.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
So the next section of the committee report is section B. And so at our July teleconference committee hearing, we had the opportunity to review additional bills and potentially recommend to the board positions on items. And the first one for potential action is Assembly Bill 1076 by Assemblymember Ting. And it is in relation to the board's ability to conduct its access to existing records with relation to misdemeanors and felonies. Ms. Burns, would you like to provide an overview of the bill?
Absolutely. So current law allows individuals who've been arrested or convicted to petition the courts under certain circumstances to have that arrest and conviction information sealed. In addition to this option, this bill would require the Department of Justice to automatically seal certain arrest and conviction records that meet the criteria and timeframes in the bill without requiring the individual to petition the court. The bill would also prohibit the Department of Justice from providing any licensing board under the Department of Consumer Affairs, which includes the Board of Psychology, with information on arrests and convictions that have been sealed due to this automatic sealing. Additionally, the bill would prohibit the courts, so the courts that you would normally get these records from disclosing this information to the Board of Psychology as well. So you would now no longer see the arrests and convictions when we get a fingerprint done by a licensee. You would also not get the you would get the subsequent arrest, but you would not get that information, and you could no longer go to the court to get the detailed arrest and conviction information under this bill. Additionally to this bill, where is it at? They have added some exceptions in here. So criminal justice agencies, law enforcement, and the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation would all be exempted from this, so they could still access those court records and arrest and conviction information, as would now the California Department of Social Services. They license programs and facilities for the elderly, chronically ill, and child daycares. So they have been exempted. The July amendments also remove the ability of the board to deny an application for licensure based on a conviction that's been sealed under this bill, or that would be sealed under this bill. And the memo has some of the examples of convictions and arrests that we would see, the board would see, that are misdemeanor or felonies, including public intoxication, petty theft, simple assault, trespass, reckless driving, prostitution. Some of the felonies we would lose access to being able to review is assault, grand theft, and domestic violence. This bill is an additional restriction on the board above and beyond last year's AB 2138, and the timelines are different. So in AB 2138, the board can no longer come July 1, 2020, use convictions that are over 7 years old. This bill has a 3-year time frame for felonies and a 1-year time frame for misdemeanors. The biggest component of this is not so much on the initial applicants, where we would have already lost much of our ability to deny in 2138, but actually the board's bigger concerns right now is your petitions for reconsideration. That means we lose this information not just on applicants, but on our current licensees. So the board has taken an action and revoked someone's license for such egregious violations. They come back to petition the board. When we have them fingerprint, you would no longer see any subsequent arrests since that revocation. So you would miss, if they were continuing a pattern of behavior during that time period, we would not have access to that information if these records are automatically sealed. So there are now provisions in here if there's been any action on the arrest to potentially go for a conviction, at least the severe loophole that you pretty much could have just been evading the law and your record would have been sealed, that is no longer in there, but it is generally taking away quite a bit and is not exactly in alignment with 2138 as well. So the board has continued serious concerns with this bill. It's a continuance of the erosion of our ability to protect consumers and our ability to access information and review and evaluate that information, but definitely most concerning is the inability for us to effectively evaluate rehabilitation for those petitions for reinstatement, because you're just going to have a gap. You're not going to be able to ask them about the conviction because it's been sealed, and they're allowed under this law to not say anything about the conviction. We won't have any record of it, and we could not get any record of it through the courts. And the board has very serious concerns about that. So the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee, they met in July and took an opposed position. Staff is recommending the same opposed position. There were amendments this week on the bill. It's more about once the probation officers or others are petitioning to not seal the record, it still would require the Department of Justice, in my reading of the bill, to do this automatic sealing provision, even though the legislative summary does not say that. But I don't see where they're getting that from. So as it currently stands, the Department of Justice would have to continuously review and then automatically seal.
Are there any questions or discussion on this item for Ms. Burns or for the board? So the committee is recommending an opposed position to the bill. Is there a motion from any board members to adopt the committee's recommendation to oppose this bill?
I move that we adopt the committee's recommendation to oppose this bill.
I second.
So that has been moved by Dr. Harpshies and seconded by Dr. Kasuga. And board discussion on this item? Is there public comment with relation? Oh, I'm so sorry, Ms. Cervantes.
No, never mind. I guess I was going to ask if the bill passed, if there was some other way that we can access, like if there was a court filing. And I don't know how all of those procedures work, but for example, if someone was accused of a crime and they were being prosecuted, at some point, isn't there a public record, like the state versus that person? Would we be able to access even that?
My understanding of this is once it's sealed, it's as if it didn't occur.
Oh, okay.
And so the court that has said record would not be able to give it to us. And then there's an alternative that the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation, who we use to investigate our cases, they have access as a law enforcement agency or a criminal justice agency. However, their prioritization guidelines put this kind of a review at the bottom rung of importance because it already can take up to 12 months to investigate a case. And obviously they have to prioritize things like patient harm, sexual misconduct above other things. So this has been one that they put at the bottom and they say you boards should take care of it because we don't have the resources, except this bill would say that said boards don't have any access to it. So it's kind of a circular, you just don't have access at that point.
Dr. Harpachitz?
I think it's also important to really recognize and really pay attention to the idea that applicants do not have to list and people renewing their licenses don't have to state that there have been any convictions. So we would never know. We just wouldn't know.
We can say from experience, even though we have a subsequent arrest portal, that the board is notified generally of subsequent arrest, but not all things are perfect in this world, and they're not always entered timely or at all. And we have had instances where a conviction was brought to the board's attention as part of a renewal and not part of the Department of Justice subsequent arrest notifications. So there are times where we're going to miss things. And this bill would say that they don't even have to tell us because it's as if it didn't exist. So.
Any additional board discussion on this item? Any public comment on this item? And I think just to clarify, one of the things is that with the passage of AB 2138 last year, the board is in the process of working with relevant stakeholders to develop a process for adoption of 2138, and that the concern with relation to this bill is in particular less on the applicant side, initial applicant side, and more on the renewal or petition for reinstatement, et cetera, side. And so I think that's certainly a discussion item that the committee talked about, and something that was discussed thoroughly there as well. So seeing no other board or public comment, and we do have a motion by Dr. Harpachitz and a second by Dr. Kasuga. Could you please call the roll?
Bernal.
Aye.
Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harbsheets.
Aye.
Horn.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, so I'm moving on to item BB, B1B, I should say. So these are no action items per se, but the first item is AB 798 by Assemblymember Cervantes related to maternal mental health. This bill in the past, actually that's not the right one I have in front of me. Oh, here we go. So this bill in the past, the board did take a supportive amended position if the author included postpartum and psychological in the bill. That bill became a died in the House of Origin in that session. And to back up, I should say that this bill would declare that it's the intent of the legislature to address the shortage of treatment options for women suffering from maternal mental health disorders, including postpartum depression and anxiety disorders. And so the board did take a position in 2017 to support the bill if amended. The bill didn't make it through, and it's to our understanding as a committee, that those items have not made it through this current version as well. So staff will continue to watch AB 798 by Assemblymember Cervantes, but this is a no action requested item at this time. Are there any? Yes, Dr.
So
Horn.
I'm not understanding what you're saying here. This is still going through, but they haven't made the changes we requested? Or
We requested them
suggested?
last time, and then the
Yeah.
bill promptly died after the request, so we
Right.
did not get any traction on those amendments.
Yeah.
This bill was put out as the exact same bill as last time without any amendments.
Okay.
And then this bill has also recently had its hearing canceled by the author as well, so it almost seems it's going to also go quiet and dormant this year as well. So the question was if you really wanted to support if amended, when it's most likely not going to move, it didn't seem like an applicable thing since it wasn't going to continue to move.
Okay. If we said watch and it actually did continue to move, then we can't change that. I mean, does that mess up any timing? You know what I'm asking?
Yeah,
Is
because
it
there's
too
only
late
5
for
more
us
weeks.
then to say if you
Yes,
amend it?
barring a teleconference.
Okay.
And again, it's a pilot program, so this is not a statewide program. So there would still be movement once it became a broader program than just a few counties to look at that as well. So,
Okay, but for me, the issue is those two things not being included,
Yes.
period. I don't care if it's pilot
or not, yeah.
or not, yeah. And so if it is going to die, I mean, I take your
And that's where it
comment,
seemed
but-
to go. So, and that was the question of if it's not going to continue moving, then not too much purpose in taking the position.
And there's not much likelihood that it will move at this point, given that the author has killed the bill.
That's my guess. Usually when it's the committee's canceled at the request of the author, that's usually a signal it's not going to continue moving.
Okay.
So
I just don't want us to,
miss the opportunity.
Yeah.
It's up to you. If you really wanted to take one and it continues to not move, it would be a position on a bill that's not moving and dies. But I think that was our consideration at the committee is if it's not going to move, there's not really a point.
Any additional board discussion or questions?
Sorry about that. Might it move next year? That
Absolutely.
we might
Mhm.
get in the language since we're in the middle of a 2-year session.
And that can be something we can ask the author is if they plan to bring it back up in January, since it's the first year of a 2-year session, they could bring it back up in January. And we could have the discussion at the October meeting that when it's brought back up, that we would like that position and to work with the author on those amendments. But we can definitely have that as a response. So, because that is the option right now. So any bill that's not made it out of its house of origin or just stops in the process this year can be picked up again in January. So.
Just another option as well. Historically, we have, even if the board hasn't taken an official position, if you would like us to contact the office and if it's the will of the board that we want to convey that those are 2 areas we would like to see if the bill gets picked up again, we can always contact the office and share that sentiment with them so they know. That's always an option.
I'd really like that. I just would hate for us to miss this piece. Yeah.
And if you are volunteering to make that phone call with staff, Dr. Horn, we would.
I'll make it with staff, yeah.
Okay, great. We appreciate that.
Just out of curiosity, if we do contact the sponsors and the author of the bill, and share our concerns and share like our potential support if those amendments are added, would that help them? Kind of like push through, or does that even?
I think unless we knew the motivation
Yeah.
behind the author pulling, it would be hard to know. But we can always, once we have the call and relay the concern about the 2 issues, we can always report back at the October meeting that we have had the call. And if there is any feedback we get on the call, we can share that with you guys at that time.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
And I think we have a fairly long runway with this item, this bill particularly, since we're almost done with
The session.
the first year. And if for some reason it didn't make it to the October calendar based on whatever happens in the call, we'll still have plenty of time at our initial meeting in February to adopt a support position and potentially then have some of our board members participate in legislative visits to talk about the importance of this bill at our Sacramento convening. So I think this is a really great item for folks who are interested in to think about being an active participant in our legislative visits before our February meeting next year. So, no public comment on this item, and have we no additional board comments or questions? No, I don't think we need a motion. I think we know that it's going to be the Dr. Horn show with staff on this. In a good way. I love it. Oh, I understand now. Okay, great. And now moving on to the second item. This is Senate Bill 660, by Senator Pan. This bill would require that the trustees of the California State University and the governing boards of each community college district establish a goal of having one full-time equivalent mental health counselor per 1,500 students enrolled at each campus. And we're watching this item in particular because it does talk about an active license in good standing with the Board of Behavioral Sciences, Board of Psychology, and the Medical Board of California. The bill is currently in the Assembly Committee on Appropriations, and I'm assuming it's on the suspense file.
It is
Ms.
now on the
Burns?
suspense file as of yesterday.
And I'm assuming then, and the suspense hearing is not for another couple of weeks.
Yeah,
So
they
I
have a
think
few
that's, and the suspense file is just a place where bills that are really expensive go pending further evaluation and other discussions by the individual authors and the appropriate Senate and leadership, or Assembly leadership in this case, for those items. So that's what the suspense file is.
I'm wondering if you know, Mr. Fu, if the California State University counseling centers are still exempt from the parts of the licensing law? You know, in the law a number of years ago, and I don't know that if it's changed, certain entities were exempt, could have people in their centers identifying as psychologists, however, not having a license to practice.
So we had a bill a couple years ago that requires any exempt settings that the individuals are providing psychological services, that they can only do that under supervision of a licensed psychologist or a licensed psychiatrist for a time period of 5 years. So before there was no limitation, so now that's a 5-year limitation in exempt settings.
So we're actually several years into that, 5 years?
We are just a couple years
If you
into
win.
that.
It started
3
in
years, yeah.
2016, so 2021 is when you would start seeing more of the conversion.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
Astute observers will notice that the University of California is not listed in this bill, and that's because they're separately governed when it comes to such items by the regents. So preempting any potential questions for why UC is not included, as we do have 3 public higher education systems in our state, and being proximately next to UC Berkeley right now, and in our current board meeting. So we wanted to make sure we acknowledge that. So, is there any public comment for this bill? All right.
To answer your question seriously, I think all the UC schools do have that.
Oh,
yeah,
they do. That's right. As Dr. Horn's a faculty member at UC Davis.
Right.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Horn. No action item.
But I wasn't one of those folks because I didn't do that kind of work there. But yeah, that's right.
So no action item on this bill. And no public comment. So we'll move on. So we'll now go through the review of bills with active positions taken by the board. Ms. Burns, would you like to start us off on the AB 1145, the Garcia bill?
Absolutely. So AB 1145 is in relation to the Child Abuse Neglect Reporting Act, or CANRA as we normally call it. This one would have clarified that the definition of sexual assault would no longer include any acts specified if they were voluntarily committed and if there were no indications of abuse, unless the conduct was between a person of 21 years of age or older and a minor who is under 16 years of age. This bill essentially just provides for equal treatment of consenting minors under the law, regardless of their sexual orientation and activities. This bill died in its house of origin over in the Assembly, and we haven't gotten actually any response as to why just yet. Hopefully she'll pick back up next year. I know we are still waiting on an Attorney General opinion on this issue as well. So it kind of all ties together. It would have been nice to get some clarification on CANRA, but that will have to wait until next year. So, of course, we'll pick up advocating in support next year when it comes back up.
Board discussion or public comment? All right? Seeing and hearing none, we're actually now going to take a break for
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Review of the bills that we've taken positions on. So we just completed a review of Assembly Bill 1145 by Assemblywoman Garcia, and we're now going to turn to item 2B, Senate Bill 53 by Senator Wilk. Ms. Burns.
So this bill would make any meeting where there are two members of this board a open public meeting. That would include things like the Sunset Review Committee, where you're mocking up the Sunset Report, the telepsychology, which is no longer needing to meet, but when it was drafting language to bring to the board for consideration, and then also the Enforcement Committee. So this would make these open, public, noticed meetings. The biggest concern for the board, we value transparency, we webcast, we try to make everything as public as possible. For the board in particular, Enforcement Committee meets and includes the enforcement staff. We have had threats to enforcement staff and public safety concerns before, which is also why we don't publicize the enforcement staff members' names. So for their protection, were SB 53 to pass, that committee would also no longer be able to have a two-member committee that meets and then brings all of its recommendations back to the board. So nothing that's done in a two-member committee will not be aired in public and heard here anyways. We already do that. We always will do that. This bill is in response to other issues at different state bodies that had done some interesting meetings. But for us, it would hamper that ability.
It has unintended implications as well. So if two people were to attend an ASPPB meeting or go to the California Psychological Association convention or so on and so forth, there's a potential there, if they were to come in contact with each other, there would need to be notice to the public, and it would have to be a noticed meeting in a particular place. So it's kind of nightmarish in its implications.
It also would mean that our legislative visits, where we are going to have visits with legislators in February to talk about our issues, our bills, our concerns, it would also need to be a notice meeting, or we would have to preclude all board members to only being one board member per meeting. So it hampers quite a bit if it were to pass. In prior years, same version of the bill made it all the way through both houses and stopped at the governor's desk. This year we have a new governor, so we will see how that goes. But currently it is now, I believe, on the suspense file and appropriations. Yes, and so that is where it is. And then, of course, we will continue advocating the opposed position as taken by the board at its April board meeting, and then continue reporting out to you. Wonderful change of pace. The Department of Consumer Affairs has a active opposed position, and they are now also on board advocating in opposition to the bill.
Is there board discussion on this item or public comment? Dr. Jo Linda Crow.
The bottom, there you go.
Dr. Jo Linda Crow with the California Psychological Association. Really just a question. I noticed that in the language, in the description in the item, it very clearly says advisory committee. Is this board or are your committees advisory committees? Does it really fit? I'm just curious whether it fits that definition. You're a state body, I understand that, but there's clear language about advisory committees.
I believe we're considered part of the state bodies.
Right, but the term advisory committee, are your committees considered advisory committees or committees of the board?
I don't.
They would be considered advisory committees because they don't have any delegated authority to take final action. Everything they do is a recommendation to the full board.
And that's a term of art in terms of this legislation then? So so your committees are advisory to the Board of Psychology.
That I don't know. There are some statutory committees that are statutorily termed advisory committees. For example, some of the bureaus have statutorily created advisory committees, and because they're bureaus, they're advisory. But I think our office has always considered the committees of the board advisory because they don't have any delegated authority.
So, but you're sure that this would apply to the Board of Psychology's committees?
We've been informed it
I'm
would
sure you
definitely
have.
apply to
Okay,
all of
got
our
it.
committees.
I was just curious about the way the language was used.
That's
Thanks.
what we were informed of, so.
And just to reiterate something Ms. Burns has spoken to and we've spoken to in the past, there's nothing that happens at the level of the Board of Psychology that does not get aired in a full Board of Psychology committee meeting. So we already give, I think, the requisite transparency for any of the concerns that are attempting to be addressed by the Wilk legislation.
Absolutely.
Seeing no additional public comment, is there additional board comment or questions? Seeing none, we'll take item D, Senate Bill 66 by the Senate Pro Tem, Senator Atkins, on federally qualified health center. Ms. Burns.
And SB 66 is a bill that would allow for Medi-Cal to reimburse for patients receiving both medical and mental health services on the same day at a federally qualified health center or a rural health clinic. This gives it parity along with dental visits and a couple other types of things. The board voted to support it in April. This week, I believe yesterday, actually, it went to appropriation suspense, obviously, because it does have a cost. So currently, if these patients wanted to see a mental health provider on the same day they came in for a physical health visit, they would have to essentially either the clinic absorbs the cost or they would have to come back on another day. So making additional barriers to access to care and draining resources at these clinics as well. So the board is in support of this position. We continue to support the bill. It is on suspense. We'll watch and see if it does get out. And of course, if it gets out, we'll continue to support on the floor and at the governor's desk.
Great. Any board comment, questions? Any public comment or questions? Moving on to this last item, Senate Bill 425 by Senator Hill. The board has a support position on this bill. Ms. Burns.
So SB 425 would require healthcare facilities or any entity that arranges for healing arts licensees to practice there to report any written allegations of sexual abuse or sexual misconduct made by a healing arts licensee by a patient or a patient's representative. It does have to be in writing, but it would create another reporting mechanism for the board to begin its investigations of sexual abuse or misconduct ahead of waiting for that health facility to take action against the licensee. So this would help and make sure that there's not potentially a gap, as some of the reports in highly public cases that we've seen in the past regarding sexual abuse of patients, there can be a gap. The reporting requirements that are currently in law are that the health facility has to notify the board that there's been an action taken against the licensee once there's a negative action taken. That doesn't include if no action is taken. So if you don't take away the privileges of that licensee to practice there, then you wouldn't get the notification at the board that there was an allegation. So if that patient didn't also make a complaint to the Board of Psychology, we may not be informed of this patient harm occurring. This bill would make sure that as soon as that health facility gets that complaint, within 15 days they have to notify the Board of Psychology or the Medical Board of California, all the healing arts license boards, of those allegations. That way those investigations could go on simultaneously and separately, obviously, because one would be for their purposes and ours would be administrative. The bill's had some changes over time. It used to also include a licensee reporting requirement. That is no longer in the bill, so it no longer requires licensees within that facility that are made aware of this to report that allegation, but it does require the facility to. So the board took a support position at the April meeting, and we will continue to support that. And I want to say the bill is going to be heard soon. I had it up a minute ago. Sorry, guys. It should be heard in appropriations, but it is not set for hearing yet. So we will obviously continue to support it and hopefully get this new reporting requirement and additional tool for the board's use in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Burns. Any board or public comment on this item? All right, seeing none. So for this section here, review of bills with watch status, and this is item 13C. We will not, 13B3, I should say. We will not be going through these items one by one. Because these are watch status, the board doesn't have a position on these bills per se. And at our meeting in April, the board went through each of these items one by one. And so after the bills have been put on a watch list, we will just go through them at the request of a board member. If you have an item that you would like to be individually pulled, we welcome that. So, Dr. Harpsheets.
So I'm looking at AB5. I'm sorry, I'm looking at AB5, and I'm just wondering if you could remind me why we set it on watch, because my concern is that if this bill passes, there may be consumers affected by fewer people being able to practice in certain kinds of agencies, so less access to our services by consumers. And I can't remember when we talked about this. Can you just fill me in?
Absolutely. I was actually reading the notes on this from our last meeting because you asked a similar question. So at that point, and Dr. Phillips, you had answered sort of the reason why we had not taken a position on this bill at the time, because this bill is more, even though it does have the potential effects you've described, is more related to the practice of, rather than the consumer protection outside piece. Would you like to elaborate, Dr. Phillips?
Yeah, this is really more about the relationship between the psychologist and the agency, or so on and so forth. And although I see what you're saying in terms of access to care concerns, largely this question's outside of our ambit. This has tax implications, obviously, employment implications, those types of things. So I do know that the California Psychological Association has taken a very active position on this bill, quite appropriately, on behalf of psychologists. But I don't know that we have much skin in this game.
You know, I started thinking about it again when we were talking about the Atkins bill, which in a sense talks also about access to care, so that they would be able to come in and see us on the same day. So that's why I started thinking about it again, that there's this access to care piece that sits with me. But you're saying really more, we're talking about protection more so than access to care.
Generally so, unless we thought something was going to actually restrict that access, and if we had tremendous concerns about that. I think we've definitely seen this as more of an employment-based issue rather than a regulatory or a restriction to access to care. So,
Okay, I just wanted to understand more about where that line is drawn. Thanks.
Are there any other additional bills in this section that board members would like to discuss? And I can, set aside 30 seconds or so for us to do a quick scan of the list so that you have one more chance to take a look at it.
and then I would also just confirm that staff continue, even though it's on a watch, it doesn't mean we're not actually watching it. So as they amend, we take a look, and if we feel we have concerns about amendments, we'll actually bring it up at the meeting. So just because it's on the watch list doesn't mean we're not actively reading and watching amendments, and then if we get concerned, bring them up at the board meeting, so.
And as you review the list, one thing I have to say is I really appreciate Mr. Glasspiegel and your weekly updates, emails to us with a link to these watch bills, as well as the bills that we have a position on. It is so very useful, and I think it certainly demonstrates the fact that staff is watching these bills actively, and it's not a passive adventure. So, are there any additional bills from this section that you would like to be pulled? All right, any public comment on this section? Dr. Jo Linda Crow?
Yes, Joe Linder Crow with the California Psychological Association. Just to your question, Dr. Harbsheets, on AB5, we actually are participating in 3 separate coalitions, the California Psychological Association. We do absolutely see it as an access to care issue. And the reason that we do is that there are many clinics, there are many settings that hire psychologists as independent contractors. What we are working with these coalitions, including the Chamber of Commerce, the California Hospital Association, and then a broader healthcare coalition. What we can see that might happen is that those clinics or settings that hire psychologists to come and work on an independent contractor basis, if they had to classify all of those people as employees, many of them are telling us that they would not be able to hire that many employees. Therefore, they would reduce the number of people that work there. Therefore, the access to care for patients would be reduced. So we do see it as an access to care issue. So does the California Hospital Association. So do all the other mental health professions that are involved in these coalitions. And that is the argument we are making. We are asking for an exemption for psychologists, in our case, and the other mental health professions are doing the same thing. That is what we are asking, and then we are looking at basically, if they would take this amendment and exempt psychologists, that's what we're asking for. It's a very complicated issue and very layered issue. This is one of those situations that did have an unintended consequence. This bill hadn't, it wasn't about mental health professionals. It was about a trucking company. And that's what the California Supreme Court is called the Dynamex decision. And it's had huge implications all over the state for corporations, but it has also had a trickle-down effect. And we began hearing from your licensees who are telling us, both from people who work as independent contractors, but also psychologists who hire other psychologists to come in as independent contractors. So it could have serious implications, we think. And so I would just want to point that out, that from our perspective, it is a consumer issue as well as it goes beyond an employment issue, but also could seriously impact the level of care that psychologists are able to provide, if that's helpful.
Yeah, it's very helpful, and I appreciate what you just said about the level of care too, because I was just thinking access, but the level of care is something we need to be paying attention to.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Melody Schaefer.
I've been hiring independent contractors in our field for about 25 years or so, and what I've seen over time is because of the changes in the tax structure in code, many independent psychologists have moved to become incorporated in their own right. And so they're looking to function in a consultation role, or independent contractor role, so to speak, in many different ways. So sometimes they're consulting to a corporation, they're doing academic work, they may be having some other work that they do on the side, and then psychotherapy work. So for them, this works for how they've structured their financial picture. So I'm concerned about it for that reason. Also, in terms of what I see happening, which Dr. Jo Linder Crow said, that there'll be a forced situation of reducing the amount of slots. The board is probably aware that over the last few decades, there has been very, very little movement in the rate of remuneration from all the major and minor insurance companies for the work that we do as psychologists. And so when people create these positions for psychologists to work as independent contractors, they're giving them as much as they can, and then hitting the wall with what additional they get for the overhead of even running the business. So if you have to hire someone as an employee and give them benefits, you will be forced, because I've been doing this for so long, I know what will happen, will be forced to reduce the number of slots. It's important to understand why that is, and if you haven't, some of you may do this work, and you, of course, already know it, but those that don't do it may not understand the sensitivities and issues that impact it. So I hope that if the board has any way to support some of the concerns, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. Is there additional public comment? All right, seeing none, bring it back to board discussion. Are there any board members who would like to ask questions or one final last call? About this one? Sure, absolutely, Dr. Horn.
Any other bills?
So before we move on to another item, I do want to just highlight that with this, the emails that we receive from Mr. Glass-Steagall on a weekly basis, we are able to use that to see the latest bill analysis that's publicly available. And with regard to this bill, having just pulled up the bill analysis, I just want to note that no other board has taken a position on this bill that's publicly available currently. And so just sharing that information with board members and folks who are taking positions on it are the trade associations, which are representing their, rightfully so, their members in that case. So seeing no other discussion on AB 5, Dr. Horn, which bill would you like to bring up?
AB 476, I mean, we're watching it. I think it's appropriate to watch it. And there is going to be, a task force to take a look at this. One of the things I just think we want to watch about is that the difference between, say, an occupation and a profession, and sometimes in these kinds of bills, those two get confused. And so, I mean, nothing's going to happen yet. I mean, it's just a task force, but I want to just kind of keep us watching, I guess, is partly what I want to say.
That's really helpful. And just for for reference, this is item I, as in India, by Assembly Members Rubio and Blanca, related to foreign trained professionals and a task force creating from that. So wanted to make sure that folks have the opportunity to turn to that item. And it is page 245 out of 332 in our combined packets. So when we say we're going paper light, 300 times however many of us are there currently, we've just saved about 3,000 pages there. So, so any additional comments related to Dr. Horn's summoning of AB 476 to our attention? Yeah, great. Any public comment on that bill? All right, seeing none. Are there any other bills in this portion of the agenda that we would like to highlight and lift up for discussion or conversation? All right, seeing none. So our next section is also similar in our task. So this is the review of 2-year bills with a watch status. And these are items 4A through 4P as in Peter. And I'll go ahead and give like 30 seconds or so just so that we can get ourselves together. And while we look through this bill, I just want to acknowledge, thank you, Ms. Burns, for sending us the reminder email in advance of the board meeting that all of us should think about which items we want to pull up so that we can discuss those items, because we certainly welcome that discussion here.
And then I would just make the reminder that these bills are also, they're technically dead in the process right now, but they can also come back up in January. So again, we will always be watching them. As soon as they become active again, we would continue to watch and look at any amendments and bring them up for board discussion if we thought there might be a position necessary.
All right, so are there any bills of interest to our board members that we would like to discuss in this section? Dr. Phillips? No? Anything here? All right, so seeing none, we look forward to additional thoughts, and you have another few more months in October at our next board meeting, so we can talk more about these watch bills then as well. And any public comment on this section for items 4A through P as in Peter? All right, seeing none. So we'll go ahead and take up item C, California Psychological Association legislative proposal. And so this has been regarding psychological testing technicians. And I would like to invite Dr. Winkleman to the public comment microphone to provide us an update. And there is no board memo for this item. It's going to be a verbal report from Dr. Elizabeth Winkleman.
Hi, Dr. Elizabeth Winkleman with California Psychological Association. As we discussed at the previous meeting, CPA is developing a bill that would clearly authorize testing technicians that would work under the supervision of licensed psychologists and licensed neuropsychologists to administer psychological tests. So, and the rationale, as we had discussed at the time, and as was presented by neuropsychologists who attended the last meeting, is that there is a lack of access in many cases and long wait times for people to access psychological testing. And also, this is the use of the testing technicians is recognized by many states' laws already, also by the National Academy of Neuropsychologists, the American Academy of Clinical Neuropsychology, APA's Division 40, the Society for Clinical Neuropsychology, and our own CPA Division of Neuropsychology, who brought this issue to our attention. So what the current status now is that we're developing our legislative language, and we're planning within the next few months to get a legislative sponsor, and then we would be able to bring the bill back to you. And I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you again, the board, for their feedback at our last meeting, and the staff for their feedback on the technical issues. And just if you had any questions about it, I'd be glad to answer any questions you have about the proposed legislation.
Thank you, Dr. Winkleman. Are there any questions or or comments for Dr. Winkleman related to this item? And any additional public comments related to this item? Thank you, Dr. Winkleman, for bringing this to our attention. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So moving on to item 14, this is legislative items for future meeting. So the board may discuss other items of legislation and whether such items should be on our future board meeting agenda. So do board members have additional legislative items? I do know that we will be paying close attention to the maternal health bill based on board discussion today and based on a call that Dr. Horn will have with staff on that. So we'll be paying attention to that. So any additional other bills that folks would want to call attention to? And is there I'm sorry, Dr. Harpsheets? No, is this 14? 14. Is there public comment for item 14? All right, seeing no public comment, yes, Dr. Harpsheets.
I'm just confused because 14 was what we just heard from Dr. Winkleman on the agenda.
Those 13C.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good.
It's getting late in the afternoon.
Yes.
That's my excuse.
All right, so seeing no public comment or board comment on 14, we will now move to item 15. Do we want to take a break? Do folks need a break, or should we power through?
Do people need a break? I think we should power through and
All right.
get out of Dodge.
All right, so item 15 is our regulatory update. And before you, you will see items A through F as in Frank with items and with their status. We do have one particular item that does require board action. And this is item, where is it? Item E for
15E.
continuing professional development. So during this process, there was an inadvertent removal of certain code sections of CPD, and staff is requesting that we approve amended language into item E, and this is for sections 1381.9, et cetera, in this item. And they are attached and highlighted in yellow for this conversation. So it is page 263 out of 332 in your combined PDF packets. So Ms. Burns, would you like to provide a quick update on what was inadvertently removed and why we just need to take this formal action to put it back in?
Absolutely. So you'll see it highlighted as section K1, and this is in 1397.61. We made sure to clarify in the new portion about the how long to maintain your documentation and record for CPD for reactivations and reinstatements, and inadvertently forgot to also carry along from the prior version of the regulations how long licensees need to maintain that documentation for general renewals. So in our effort to be more clear for reinstatements and reactivations, we accidentally we missed that we didn't carry along the regular ones for normal renewals. So we, luckily caught that thanks to Ms. Mark's keen eyes on her review. And so we are asking to put that in. Of course, it would be the exact same as it always has been. So you would maintain the documentation of your continuing professional development, along with any continuing education, for 4 years from the effective date of your renewal. So it's the same 4-year time frame. You renew, keep that documentation for 4 years after that point. And of course, that would be so that you could supply that information to the board upon an audit. So this just adds back in the old language from the earlier version of the regs, the ones that are currently relevant and active. And so then now we have them all, renewals, reinstatements, and reactivations all covered. And before we go out to notice. Oops.
And I do want to point out the highlighted language, if you're a visual person like myself, is on page 275 of 332, and it's starting with a letter K1, with each person who applies to renew, et cetera. And that's the 4-year provision that Ms. Burns just described, and it is on that page. So we do need a motion to approve this language. Let me make sure I have the motion correct. To approve the amended continuing professional development language. And Dr. Horn?
I'll move it.
Moved by Dr. Horn and seconded by Dr. Kusuga. Is there board discussion for this motion related to approving the amended language, which is just putting something back inadvertently removed? All right, seeing no board comment or discussion, is there public comment on this item? Seeing no public comment, returning it to the board and not seeing additional board discussion. Ms. Burns, could you please call the roll for this?
Bernal.
Aye.
Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harpsheet.
Aye.
Horn.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. And again, just with the watch bills that we did similarly, we did breeze through the other items that didn't require action. So at this time, if there are any board members who would want an additional update or have questions related to any of the other regulatory packaged items moving before us, please feel free to raise it. Right. And while you do that, a quick question, Ms. Burns. You had mentioned, do we need a motion to notice the CPD package, or because it's been done previously, we don't need additional board action on that?
I would think so.
I believe there had been a prior motion to approve the language for noticing. This is, the way I see it, just a motion to amend that language that was already approved for noticing. And just want to remind everybody, I believe there was a subsequent motion to delegate the authority to the executive officer and legal to make technical non-substantive changes as well, probably to all these packets.
Yes.
That's the standard practice for the board.
Perfect, thank you. So are there additional items in item 15 that we wanted to bring up? Yes, Ms. Orick.
Really quickly, I just want to take this opportunity to again give a shout out to Dr. Horn, who spent countless hours with legal counsel and staff to prepare the continuing professional development package and help with the drafting of the initial statement of reasons, which tells the why we're making the changes. And I just want to say how much we appreciate you taking that time to spend with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Horn. All right, not seeing additional items for discussion and seeing no public comment for items 15, we conclude our Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fu. Very much appreciated. So we're going to adjourn for today. I do want to remind you, as I stated at the outset of this afternoon's session, that tomorrow morning we will be going back into closed session at 9:30 a.m. At the earliest, we would commence again at 10 a.m. and maybe a little bit later than that. But if you want to be here for all the proceedings tomorrow, 10 a.m. was the earliest you would need to be here. And with that in mind, we don't need a motion to adjourn. That's okay. Yeah. Stick a fork in me, I'm done. You can turn me over. So we'll adjourn for today and we'll recommence tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. in closed session. Thank you.